I gave up everything to care for my father until the very end. At the funeral, they gave the entire life insurance to my brother. Said he needed it more. I didn't argue. I just left, sold my car, started a delivery business. 2 years later, he got a package from me. Hey, I'm Lorena. Subscribe to our channel and watch until the end. Because this story doesn't end the way you imagine. When they said it was serious, I grabbed a small bag and drove 6 hours without stopping. I thought I was going to help for a few days, maybe a week. I had no idea I was leaving my life behind. My father had pneumonia again, and deep down, I knew this time was different. Something about the silence on the phone, the hesitation in the nurse's voice, it told me everything. I didn't ask for details. I didn't wait for my brother to show up. I just went. Funny how quickly your world shrinks when someone you love is on the edge. I left my job, let go of my apartment, paused my plans, froze my savings, gave my plans to a neighbor. In a blink, I went from scheduling meetings to learning how to change hospital sheets. One life faded while another, one I never asked for, took its place. He was never the affectionate type. We weren't close, not in the way people imagine. But when I walked into that hospital room and saw the way he looked at me, half proud, half afraid, I knew I couldn't leave. Maybe it wasn't about duty. Maybe it was just love in its most inconvenient form. The kind that shows up even when no one claps for it. My brother? He sent a text. A fruit basket. Said he was juggling a lot. Had his own kids, his own life. I remember staring at my phone, wondering how many people get to walk away from their parents when things get hard, and how many women are expected to stay no matter what. No one asked me if I was okay with it. They just assumed I'd do it. Because I'm the daughter, and daughters stay. The house became a world of routines. Pills at 9, oxygen check at noon, soup at 3. Nights blurred into mornings. And sometimes I'd forget what day it was. But I didn't complain. Not once. I listened to him breathe. I held his hand when he fell asleep. And when he got confused and called me by my mother's name, I didn't correct him. I just sat there letting him feel safe. He got worse. Some days he didn't talk at all. Other days, he'd stare at the door like someone was about to walk in. I knew who he was waiting for, and I hated how much it still mattered to him. There I was, right in front of him, wiping his face, helping him eat, and still, a part of him clung to the hope that my brother would show up. But he never did. It hurt, not because I needed recognition, but because I was exhausted and invisible. I went weeks without speaking to another adult. My world became lab results, coughs in the middle of the night, and the slow fading of a man who had once seemed invincible. You learn a lot about someone when you help them die. You learn even more about yourself. Then came that night. His breathing was shallow, his grip weaker than ever, until suddenly he squeezed my wrist, looked straight into my eyes, and whispered, "Thank you. I'm not scared when you're here." That was the moment I broke. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried harder than I had in years. Not for him, but for everything I had lost without even noticing. That's the thing no one tells you about being the one who stays. You give up so quietly that you don't realize what's missing until the world outside moves on, and you don't. You stay. You hold the hand. You bear the weight. And when it's all over, you're the one left behind, not because they died, but because you're the only one who remembers how much it all mattered. People kept asking about my brother like he was the missing piece in a perfect family puzzle. Has he come to visit? Is he flying in soon? Even the nurses, kind women who watched me stretch my back on plastic chairs every day, spoke his name like he was just running late. I nodded, smiled, said maybe next week. But inside I knew. He wasn't coming. Not really. He called once during the second month. His voice was light, distracted, like he was checking in on a coworker, not his father. He asked how things were, said he was proud of me, then launched into a story about a business trip and a golf deal that fell through. I could hear kids screaming in the background. He laughed about it. I didn't. That phone call ended with, "Hang in there, sis." Like I was doing a short shift, not rebuilding my entire life around someone else's decline. I didn't argue. What was the point? People only hear what they want to justify. And if he wanted to believe that I was managing, then fine. Let him. What stayed with me most wasn't his absence. It was how easily everyone excused it. He has kids, responsibilities. As the man of the family, he has to keep working. Those words were said with such certainty, as if nurturing a dying parent was a feminine instinct, a side task you squeeze between laundry and grocery runs. Meanwhile, I was folding adult diapers at midnight, trying to stretch what little savings I had left, and still he made it sound like I had more free time than he did. There's a specific kind of loneliness that sets in when you realize no one expects better from the people who do less. My brother had managed to craft an entire identity around being busy and successful, and people admired that. Even my father, when he had the strength, would say things like he's got a lot on his plate, as if I didn't. Some nights, I sat by my father's bed and imagined what it would be like if he walked in. What would he say? Would he hug me? Would he even know how to? I used to crave that moment, crave some proof that he cared. But after a while, I stopped waiting. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. You can't keep knocking on a door that never opens. He finally showed up once. Briefly. It was my dad's birthday, though there were no candles, no cake, just a weak smile and a flicker of recognition in his eyes. My brother brought a bottle of wine we couldn't open and a box of chocolates my father couldn't eat. He stayed for 20 minutes, took a photo for social media, and left before the nurse finished changing the floor. That was his contribution. And still, everyone acted like it meant something. He came all this way, they said. But distance isn't always measured in miles. Sometimes it's in how easily someone walks out the door. And my brother? He walked out without ever really walking in. I remember sitting alone that night, scrolling through my phone, seeing the picture he posted, a filtered snapshot of him holding Dad's hand, captioned with something like, "Grateful for this time together." Thousands of likes, dozens of comments, none of them from me. I wasn't angry. Not really. But something inside me shifted again. I started to understand that some people don't need to be cruel to hurt you. Sometimes all it takes is absence wrapped in performance. And sometimes the quiet ones take longer to rise. But when they do, they don't just return. They rebuild. The day felt different from the start. Not colder, not quieter, just still. Like the air itself had paused. I noticed it as I stirred his soup that morning. The way the spoon moved slower through the broth. How the clock seemed hesitant to tick forward. I sat by his side and read him the newspaper, even though I knew he couldn't follow the words anymore. But I did it anyway because routine makes you feel like you're still holding things together, even when everything's already slipping away. He barely opened his eyes that day, just flickers now and then, like his body was trying to decide whether to keep trying or let go. I wiped his forehead with a damp cloth, adjusted his pillow, watched the rise and fall of his chest like it was a fragile metronome holding the room in rhythm. I didn't speak much, not because there was nothing to say, but because it didn't feel like words belonged anymore. Mid-afternoon, a nurse came in to check his vitals. Her face was kind, but her silence said everything. She lingered a little longer than usual, touched my shoulder on the way out. I knew what she meant, and even though I thought I was ready, that moment cracked something in me I didn't even know was still whole. You think you've braced yourself, but death always finds the one place you forgot to cover. Around dusk, I brought in the blanket he liked, the one with the worn corners and the smell of cedar. He didn't react, but I placed it over him anyway. The sun was setting through the window, casting this orange-gold light across his face, making him look more peaceful than he had in weeks. It was beautiful and cruel all at once. He hadn't spoken all day, not a word. But as I sat beside him, just watching him breathe, I felt his fingers twitch against mine. At first I thought it was reflex, but then he gripped a little harder. Not strong, but deliberate. I looked down and he opened his eyes just barely and whispered, "Don't let them take it from you." It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it. But I didn't. He said it again, slower this time. "Don't let them take it." Then his hand relaxed, his eyes closed, and I knew. That was goodbye. Not with drama, not with tears, just a warning. A plea. And then silence. I sat there long after the monitors stopped. Hours passed, I think. Nurses came in, spoke softly, stepped around me like I was part of the furniture. I signed papers, answered questions I don't remember. Everything felt numb, like I was watching it from behind glass. I only snapped back when they handed me the envelope, his personal effects. Inside, his watch, a small photo of my mother, and a sealed note with my name on it. I didn't open it right away. I kept it in my coat pocket, pressing it between my fingers like a heartbeat I wasn't ready to hear. For days, I walked around with it, through the funeral, the condolences, the carefully rehearsed sympathy of people who hadn't been there. People who said, he's in a better place now, without realizing he had already been somewhere better in that room with me. My brother flew in for the funeral, of course. Front row, black suit, sunglasses. He gave a eulogy full of childhood memories he wasn't around to make. People cried. They hugged him, told him how proud his father would be. I stood by the door, letting the silence speak for me. I didn't need a microphone. I had scars. Later that night, back in the house, I finally opened the note. It was short. Just one sentence. Whatever they say, I chose you. That's all. No explanation. No details. Just a quiet truth slipped into my hands like a secret he wanted me to protect. And I did, even when everything after tried to convince me otherwise. After the funeral, things moved fast. Too fast, actually. The kind of fast that doesn't give you time to breathe, much less grieve. Within days, my father's lawyer, well, technically our family lawyer, called a meeting to finalize the paperwork. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, like someone who delivered bad news enough times to make it sound like procedure. He said it wouldn't take long. Just a few signatures, nothing dramatic. I showed up in the same coat I wore at the hospital. Still smelled like his room. The office was polished, impersonal, too bright for what was about to happen. My brother was already there, leaning back in his chair like he'd just come from brunch. He nodded at me like we were equals, like we were both walking in from the same storm. But I was drenched, and he hadn't even felt the rain. The lawyer started with pleasantries, then moved to numbers. There were a few minor assets, but the real focus was the life insurance. My father had taken out a substantial policy a few years back, something to secure the family. I remember the nurse mentioning it once during one of his hospital stays, something about him being proud of planning ahead. I never asked questions. I never even thought about it. I didn't stay for money. I stayed because he needed me. But when the lawyer opened the folder and said, all proceeds from the life insurance will go to Marco, I felt something slide out from under me. I blinked. Thought I heard wrong. What? I asked, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the room. He repeated it, word for word. The beneficiary listed is your brother. Full amount. No explanation. No apology. Just numbers. I didn't say anything right away. Just looked at my brother, waiting for him to speak up, to say, no, that can't be right, or let's fix this. But he didn't. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, and said, Dad probably thought I needed it more, with the kids and all. As if that made sense. As if those years I spent wiping blood from our father's mouth were just volunteer hours. The lawyer avoided my eyes. Probably knew. Probably helped arrange it. The whole thing reeked of something rehearsed. Like they had anticipated this moment, prepared for my silence, maybe even counted on it. And the worst part, everyone in that room acted like this was fair. Like it was logical. Like of course the son with a mortgage and 2 kids should be the one who benefits. The daughter who stayed, who gave up everything, who held her father's hand while he died, that daughter? She doesn't need compensation. She already had her special time with him. That's how they do it. They romanticize your suffering so they don't have to honor it. I felt my chest burning, not from the money, but from the insult wrapped around it. He chose you, I thought. Those words in my coat pocket. I clung to them like a life raft in that sterile room, full of polite betrayal. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stood up, thanked the lawyer for his time, and walked out. My brother called after me, something about not making this harder than it needs to be, but I was already gone. On the way home, I stopped at a red light and looked at my hands gripping the wheel. They were the same hands that fed my father, cleaned him, held him while he shivered. And now they were shaking, not from grief, but from something colder, something sharper. That was the night I knew I wouldn't fight them in court. I wouldn't scream or beg. I'd build something they couldn't take from me. And one day, I'd deliver it myself. I sold the car 2 weeks later. It wasn't out of impulse or pride, it was necessity. Between hospital bills, rent arrears, and the funeral costs no one else offered to split, I needed something that would keep me moving and breathing at the same time. I used part of the money to pay off the last credit card. The rest? I bought a bike. Not a shiny one. Just enough frame and rubber to carry me forward without falling apart beneath me. My first delivery was for a bookstore 3 blocks from my apartment. A woman in her 60s handed me a package wrapped in brown paper and string, like it belonged to another decade. I strapped it to my back and pedaled down cracked sidewalks, weaving through cars and secondhand thoughts about how low I'd fallen. But when the customer opened her door and smiled like I'd brought her something sacred, something she'd been waiting for all day, I realized I hadn't fallen. I'd just started over. No one knew my name yet. To them, I was just a woman with a bike and a backpack. And maybe that was a good thing. Stripped of history, expectations, family shadows, I was light. Invisible but free. Each trip was a small victory. Each address, a quiet rebellion. I started keeping a notebook of every street I rode, every customer who looked me in the eye. I didn't know it then, but I was building something. Route by route, mile by mile. The city became my map, and I memorized it like scripture. I learned which alleys flooded when it rained, which intersections had drivers who never looked both ways, which buildings had doormen that flirted too long. I learned to ride without headphones, just me, the wind, and the hum of my wheels. There's something strangely sacred about that kind of rhythm. It drowns out everything that once made you small. Some days were brutal. My legs ached. My hands blistered. I lost deliveries, got yelled at by clients, wiped out on wet pavement more than once. But there was something pure in the exhaustion. It wasn't the kind of tired that made you feel used. It was the kind that made you feel alive. And after everything I'd been through, that mattered more than pride. I started to recognize people. Shop owners, office clerks, women on lunch breaks who'd nod at me through cafe windows. I wasn't just passing through anymore. I was showing up. Rain or shine, I delivered. Quietly, consistently, and people noticed. One bakery gave me free coffee on Thursdays. A florist started slipping a single daisy into every box I picked up. It was small, but it reminded me kindness doesn't always have to come from the people you expected it from. By the end of that year, I'd built a client list long enough to justify a name. So I printed it on a patch and stitched it to my jacket. Lorena Rides. Nothing fancy, just mine. I registered the business, bought a second bike, hired a woman who'd just lost her job and had rent due in 3 days. We rode together the next morning. 2 women on old bikes with fire in their lungs and nothing to prove but everything to build. I didn't talk about my family. I didn't need to. This was the version of me they didn't get to know. The one who didn't ask for permission or approval. The one who stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. I had traded their silence for motion. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't stuck. Looking back, I think that bike saved me. Not because it got me anywhere fast, but because it reminded me I could move on my own terms. 1 mile at a time. It started with one woman. She was standing outside a pharmacy, holding a cardboard sign that said, "Just need a chance." I passed her 3 times that week, always meaning to say something, but never sure what. On the 4th morning, I stopped. Asked if she'd ever ridden a bike. She said no, but she could learn. 2 days later, she was following me through downtown with a bag strapped to her shoulders and a look in her eyes like maybe, just maybe, she mattered again. That's how it began. No business plan. No mission statement, just a feeling that I wasn't the only one who needed a way out that didn't depend on anyone else's permission. I started saying yes to people who were used to hearing no. A woman who'd aged out of foster care. A mother who'd left an abusive marriage with nothing but her 2 kids and a suitcase. A cashier who was fired after missing too many shifts to care for her sick grandmother. I trained them all. Not just to ride, but to show up. Not for me, for themselves. We became something bigger than delivery. We were motion, purpose, grit. We weren't trying to change the world. We just wanted to carry what was too heavy to carry alone. There's something sacred about putting weight on your back and moving forward anyway. And when you do it with someone else beside you, it becomes more than survival. It becomes belonging. At first, we shared bikes. Then I saved enough to buy 2 more. We fixed them up ourselves, grease under our nails, laughter in the air. We mapped routes on weekends, created group chats for support, left notes for each other taped to handlebars. You've got this! Don't forget to hydrate! We started calling each other riders, not employees. We weren't building a company. We were building trust. Clients started to notice, not just that their packages arrived on time, but that they arrived with care, with stories, with women who looked them in the eye and meant it when they said, "Have a good day." I got emails from offices, from shops, from people who'd never noticed their delivery drivers before but now knew their names. Something was shifting, and not just in logistics. We got featured in a local article, the delivery women who are changing the city 1 mile at a time. I didn't care about the headline. What mattered was that the woman in the photo beside me had smiled for the first time in months. What mattered was that her daughter saw her in a uniform she was proud of. What mattered was that we were no longer invisible. And then came the contracts, bigger ones, offices, subscription services, even a few government buildings. One morning, I got a call from a logistics director who said she'd heard we ran tight and honest. She didn't ask for a presentation, just asked how many routes we could handle. That's when I knew we weren't small anymore. I hired a lawyer, created terms, registered the brand properly. We became Lorena Rides Collective. And the best part? Every rider owned a piece. I made sure of it. We weren't going to replicate the world we came from, the one where some people take and others stay quiet. We were going to build a model where carrying weight made you stronger, not smaller. One night, after a long day of rain-soaked routes, I sat with 2 of my riders over coffee. One of them looked at me and said, "You saved my life." I shook my head. "No," I told her, "you saved your own. I just rode beside you until you remembered how." That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since my father died, I didn't feel heavy. I felt held by purpose, by the people I'd chosen, by the rhythm of something I was finally proud to call mine. It was a Tuesday morning, cool and bright, the kind of day that makes the city feel almost forgiving. I was at the warehouse early, sorting out new delivery routes, double-checking bikes, updating inventory. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet rhythm of building something with your own hands. Then Sarah, one of my newest riders, walked up holding a clipboard and said, "You'll want to see this one." I took it without thinking. Another contract, another account. But then I saw the name. The company wasn't familiar at first. Some long acronym. Something corporate. But the billing contact? Marco Villani. My brother. I stared at the page like it might change if I blinked. It didn't. He was requesting our services. Large volume. Recurring shipments. Priority status. I read the address twice. It was his. I laughed. Not loud. Not bitter. Just enough to release the pressure in my chest. Of all the companies, all the logistics firms in the city, his team had chosen ours. Maybe he didn't even know yet. Maybe it was one of his managers. Maybe they'd done their research, compared rates, saw our delivery stats, our reputation for reliability. Or maybe life had a better sense of humor than I ever gave it credit for. I held the paper for a long time. Long enough for Sarah to ask if everything was okay. I nodded, smiled, and said, "Yeah, just didn't expect this one." I handed the clipboard back, told her to process it like any other order, but to hold the first package for me. "I'll deliver it myself," I said. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. My riders trusted me. That mattered. That night, I stayed late at the office, sat at my desk with a blank shipping box in front of me, thinking about what to put inside. I could have sent a note, something clever, something that stung. But that wasn't the point. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't looking for revenge. What I wanted was something deeper. A shift. A reckoning. Something that couldn't be dismissed with a shrug or a lawyer's smile. So I started gathering. Not items, evidence. A printed copy of the test results from the ink analysis I'd paid for, confirming the signature on my father's had been altered. A copy of the earlier draft I'd found tucked in a folder in his study, the one naming me as sole beneficiary. The chain of emails from the law firm, where one name in particular popped up too many times. An uncle who conveniently received a large gift shortly after the reading of the will. I put them all inside, organized, dated, stamped. Then I added the video. Months before my father died, he'd asked me to help him record a few things. Memories mostly. A message for my birthday. One for his grandchildren. But there was one file I'd never opened, saved on an old USB with nothing but the title if they try. That night I watched it. His voice was slower than I remembered. His face pale, tired but clear. He looked into the camera and said, "If you're seeing this, then someone changed what I wrote. But I want you to know, I left it all to you, Lorena." I told them. I told the lawyer. I didn't want Marco to have anything. He made his choices. You were the one who stayed. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just closed the laptop and slipped the USB into the box. Last, I added a copy of the new contract. The one his company had signed, granting us exclusive delivery rights for all regional logistics. Standard terms, but with one addendum, due to service overlap and a buyout clause his own legal team had approved without reading carefully. He now owed me 10% of his company's shares. Nothing major. Just enough to make sure the next board meeting had my name on the minutes. I sealed the box and wrote the label myself. No note. No return address. Just our logo and the name Lorena Villani typed clean across the top. The next morning, I delivered it in person. The lobby hadn't changed. Same marble floors, same sterile air, same receptionist who barely looked up when I walked in. I was wearing the company jacket, our logo stitched clean across the back, my name clipped to the front. Just another delivery as far as they knew. That was the point. I signed in, smiled politely, and stepped into the elevator like I'd done it 1,000 times. The ride to the 12th floor was quiet, but my pulse wasn't. Not from nerves, those were long gone, but from something deeper. Not anger, not triumph. Just presence. The feeling of being exactly where you're meant to be, at the exact time you're meant to be there. No permission, no apology. Just return. His assistant opened the door. Young, polite, clueless. She asked if I had something for Mr. Villani, and I nodded. Personal delivery, I said. He'll want to sign for it himself. She hesitated, but then buzzed me through. And there he was, sitting behind a sleek glass desk, backlit by the city skyline, wearing the kind of suit that looks expensive even when it shouldn't. He looked up. At first, he didn't recognize me. That part hurt more than I expected. It had been years, but still. I saw the confusion flicker, then settle into forced politeness. Can I help you? He asked. I walked over and placed the box on his desk. Delivery for Marco Villani, I said, voice steady. Signature required. He blinked, then narrowed his eyes. Lorena. The name sounded strange in his mouth, like it didn't belong there anymore. I didn't respond, just handed him the pen. He signed. Hand slower now. I think he knew something wasn't right. He opened the box in silence. At first, it was just paper. Folders. Dates. Copies. Legal language that would take him a few minutes to absorb. But I watched the moment it hit. The moment his jaw tightened. The moment he realized this wasn't just information. This was evidence. Layered, chronological, undeniable. I didn't need him to speak. I could read the panic in his eyes. Then he found the USB. He stared at it like it might explode. What is this? He asked, voice smaller now. I met his gaze for the first time. You'll want to watch it somewhere private, I said. It's from Dad. And for a second, just one, his face cracked. Not guilt, not sorrow, just the realization that whatever lie he'd been living under was about to end. Finally, he reached the last item. The contract. Stamped. Signed. Legally binding. He scanned the addendum and went pale. This is a joke, he muttered. You tricked them. I shook my head. No one was tricked. They just didn't look closely. Same way you didn't look at Dad. At me. At anything that didn't serve you. He stood up. I didn't flinch. He said something about getting lawyers involved, but his voice was all air now, no weight behind it. You really think this gives you power over me? He snapped. I smiled, not out of spite, but because the question was so tired. No, I said. This doesn't give me anything. It just returns what was mine. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard paper shuffle. The sound of someone realizing their foundation had shifted. But I didn't wait for a final word. He'd had years to speak. I was done listening. The elevator ride down was faster than I remembered. When I stepped outside, the wind hit my face and it felt like the first breath after holding it underwater too long. I pulled my jacket tighter, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and climbed back onto my bike. There were still deliveries to make. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. No phone calls. No threats. No lawyers at my door. Just silence, the kind that comes after a storm you didn't start but were forced to finish. I kept writing, kept showing up, kept doing what I'd always done. The women in my crew never asked about the delivery, but they could feel something had shifted. And honestly, so could I. There was no press release, no scandal, no dramatic downfall. Just a slow, invisible unraveling of a man who finally realized the world wouldn't bend for him anymore. I heard from someone inside his company, off the record, that he'd called an emergency board meeting, that he looked pale, shaken, that he didn't speak for half the meeting, just sat with that folder in front of him, like it was a mirror he couldn't look away from. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. That's not what this was about. This wasn't revenge. It was recognition. Of the truth, of the time, of the years I gave without a single thank you, of the inheritance they tried to erase. What he received in that package wasn't just evidence, it was memory. And memory, when it's rooted in truth, is heavier than any punishment. I didn't need an apology. I didn't want one. Words from him would have felt too late, too shaped, too careful. What I wanted was already mine. My name on the contract, my voice in the room, my stake in the legacy they tried to rewrite without me. I didn't take back what they gave me. I took back what they stole. With proof. With patience. With my own 2 hands. A month later, I received the official notice. My shares had been transferred. 10%. Enough to attend board meetings, vote on decisions, see the books. I framed the letter, not to show off, but to remind myself of what silence can build when it's full of purpose. At our office, we moved into a bigger space. More bikes. More women. We expanded routes to nearby cities, partnered with a shelter that now refers new riders to us every week. We added a training program, a daycare room, a coffee corner with a bookshelf and soft chairs for when someone just needs to sit and breathe before going out again. It became more than logistics. It became home. One morning, as I was sorting invoices, I opened a drawer and found my father's old watch. The one from the hospital bag. It didn't work anymore, but I wound it anyway just to hear the sound. I held it to my ear and thought about the day he whispered, "Don't let them take it from you." He didn't just mean the money. He meant my voice, my place, my story. I walked outside into the morning sun and stood on the sidewalk watching our riders get ready. Laughter, chatter, rubber tires clicking against pavement. One of them waved at me and shouted, "You coming?" I nodded, grabbed my helmet, and got on the bike. As we rolled out onto the street, wind on our faces, I thought about how far we'd come. Not just in miles, but in meaning. I wasn't riding to prove anything anymore. I was riding because I could. Because no one else was steering the path for me. Because I had turned a betrayal into a blueprint. A loss into a legacy. And somewhere in the city, behind glass walls and silent phones, I knew my brother was sitting with the weight of something I didn't need to explain. What was mine, I took back.